Welcome to the new Workology Go Podcast. In just under 5 minutes, we'll get you the HR and workplace news you need before you start your day 2 times a week. Get ready, get set, and go with the new Workology Go Podcast.
Here are today's HR and workplace news headlines from the Workology Go Podcast. I'm Jessica Miller-Merrill. This podcast is sponsored by Workology. Between 2010 and 2015, the number of taxpayers penalized for underpaying estimated taxes increased nearly 40%, according to the IRS. And the rise of the gig economy is often cited as a contributing factor to these numbers. As a writer, speaker, and consultant, I've spent a lot of time as a freelancer. As a corporate HR leader, I also understand how classifications can be a challenge. As the gig economy continues to grow, it's interesting because the IRS and the Bureau of Labor Statistics really have no idea how many gig workers there actually are in the U.S. Forbes reported in 2018 there were 57 million gig workers in the U.S., and 29% of U.S. workers have side gigs or alternative employment. But back to employee misclassification. Solving the problem of worker misclassification starts with having the right policies and regulation in place. Today, states, government officials, and individual businesses are working on a variety of initiatives to help combat this issue. Many states have created task force, commissions, research teams. They investigate employee misclassification and gather data. Targeted audits conducted by some of these task forces have helped recover millions of dollars. In 2013, for example, New York's Joint Enforcement Task Force on Employee Misclassification identified nearly 24,000 instances of employee misclassification. They discovered over $333 million in unreported wages and assessed over $12.2 million in unemployment insurance contributions. Today's featured article comes from MBO Partners and is titled Employee versus Contractor, Worker Classification and the IRS. Why is working as a freelancer so attractive to this workforce? Well, I can talk about my own experiences, but in a recent Workology podcast interview, I talked with Heidi Brandis. She's a freelance writer, and she talked to us about why she left the comforts of being a traditional employee and went freelance.
Honestly, it's the absolute freedom I have. I mean, when you say you are your own boss, I really am my own boss. I can choose to sleep in that day and not get any work done, i.e. not get paid that day. Or, I can work from anywhere. I spent a month in Africa, but as long as I have Wi-Fi, I can still work. And that's what I really love about it, is the absolute freedom to be able to do the amount of work I want, when I want to do it, where I want to do it, and not have the traditional constraints of an office environment. I remember there were times when I was working in nonprofit, I'd be done by noon, but I wouldn't be able to leave because, well, traditionally I'm supposed to stay there till 5. That's what they're paying me to do. And I'm a very fast worker, so that was always very frustrating to me. Honestly, I love the freedom of being my own boss, and I can choose which articles I write. In newspapers, sometimes you would have to write articles. You're like, I really don't want to write this, but you'd have to because it's your job. Now, as a freelancer and a contractor, I can accept work. I can deny work. I pick and choose which pieces I want to write about, and that's very satisfying as well.
You have a lot more control over your work hours, your flexibility, and the work that you're doing.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But there is a downside to it as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So the downside, what is that?
Well, the downside is the lack of security. If you're in an office environment, you're a traditional employee, you know exactly how much you're going to get every paycheck every 2 weeks. I start every month. I have no idea what I'm going to make this month. It would be nice to have more retainer clients where I know I have, X amount of money coming from this client, X amount of money from this client. I usually do. But, I think that is one of the scariest things when people start considering freelancing is the total insecurity of, your finances. Some months I make, X amount of money, and some months I fall way short and I start looking at who's hiring for Uber,
Freelancing offers great flexibilities for those workers, as you've heard from Heidi. However, many employers like to hire freelancers instead of employees because it's a cost savings for them. Misclassification of employees is expensive. It's $50 for each W-2 that the employer failed to file. Penalties of 1.5% of wages, 40% of FICA taxes not withheld from employee, and 100% of the employer FICA taxes. A failure to pay tax penalty is equal to 0.5% of the unpaid tax liability for each month. That's up to 25% of the total tax liability. Ay, ay, ay. I've included some resources in the transcript of this podcast for you to determine if your contractors are really employees. You may remember, if you've been in HR for a while, what was called the 20-factor test by the IRS. It's now been compressed into 3 general categories. Number 1 is behavioral control, 2 is financial control, and 3 is relationship of the parties. Have you done an audit of your freelance and contractor workforce to see if they might be misclassified? I have lots of resources for you in the transcript of this Workology Go podcast to help you determine and understand if you are misclassifying your employees. Workology now offers SHRM certification prep classes on your schedule with over 36 hours of online training, a private Facebook group, and instruction using the SHRM learning system. We give you the resources you need. Visit workology.com/products to learn more. And that's this episode of the Workology Go podcast, sponsored by Workology. We're your go-to for HR and workplace news. I'm Jessica Miller-Merrill. Thank you for listening.
To learn more about the Workology Go podcast, subscribe to us on Apple, Google, and Stitcher. Our podcast is also available on Alexa and Google Home. Learn more at workology.com/Go podcast and access this episode's resources, links, and reports for more information.